Welcome to Techies Reproductive Justice, the podcast, a place for technologists and community organizers to learn from each other. In this podcast, we'll explore security tips and operations security for organizers, how to help keep our movement safe online, the intersections and history of technology, reproductive justice, and other types of movement work, what organizing in the digital age looks like, and the pros and cons of technology and organizing. I'm your co-host, Azamare.
And I'm your co-host, Lou. We're excited to have Kate with us on the podcast today. Kate Bertash works at the intersection of tech, privacy, art, and organizing. Bringing a scrappy background in nonprofits to mission-driven tech projects, she has a deep passion for bringing people from different areas of expertise together to build for a better future. She directs the Digital Defense Fund, launched in 2017, a digital security fund for autonomy and democracy movement organizations. Thanks, Kate.
Before we get into our interview, it's time for T4RJ's Media Recommendations of the Week, your spot for all things reproductive justice, social justice, and tech media recommendations. This episode, we want to highlight Assata, an Autobiography by Assata Shakur. This hard-hitting book details her path to radicalization and her fight for liberation, even while undergoing intense government surveillance. This book is special to a lot of folks who deem this read as a start of the radicalization journey.
Welcome, Kate, to the Techies for Reproductive Justice, the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to finally be on. Longtime fan, first-time listener, or first-time caller, I guess, as they say.
I love it. Well, to kick us off, I'd love to hear you talk about your path into technology and digital security. How did you get into that?
It's always a really fun question to start with because it begins a lot like we begin some of our trainings, which is that I get to say I don't have a formal background in technology or privacy. I don't have a formal education in it. It actually kind of started when I went to school for public policy and for Middle Eastern studies, and I thought I was going to work in government, and it kind of all didn't pan out because it was right around the 2008 recession, which was pretty brutal across the board. But it kind of forced me to sort of rethink what I was doing. I was working at a particular nonprofit job that was kind of like in international development for a while. And then I actually stopped doing that because it was really hard to pay my bills. And I moved over to the tech world for a while living in San Francisco. It was kind of interesting working for really small startups. A lot of them were in logistics. But one of the things that had happened during that time, unfortunately, were a number of really big, I think, stories both in the news about, unfortunately, gender-related violence in terms of, I think it was the Santa Barbara shooting was one particular big day. And then there was, up around that time, I had actually been supporting a lot of friends through issues with having their photos kind of taken and put online without their permission. It could be sensitive images. And a really long time prior, this is always a very strange part of the story, but when Facebook first came online in 2004, my Facebook photos were stolen and used to make online scam dating accounts. And it got so bad. And at that point, there was kind of no recourse, really. You could try to message the person who was running the website and try to make your case. Sometimes they'd ignore you and laugh at you. Later, there was sort of some recourse through something called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And you could kind of go through a process to utilize that to reclaim copyright over your images and get them removed. But again, very spotty. And so I got through the process of trying to get my scam dating accounts taken down. And especially also because a lot of people who were the victims of those scams were very angry at me, the real person. And so it really caused quite a lot of trouble in my life. I think it went on for probably 11 years. It was really quite extensive. The only reason I think it stopped is because those photos then were such small amount of they literally ran out of JPEG. They were too tiny to continue using compared to newer photos. So after all of this, I got kind of good at the process of taking photos off the internet. And so I put all those instructions up for folks to use on a site that was called undocs.me. And I started getting just a ton of messages from people who were using those templates, from their legal counsel who were using those templates. It ended up getting me into something called the Tyler Clementi Internet Safety Conference, which was sort of the first place that I found out that this stuff that people were worried about, this online privacy guides and this sort of emerging space of trying to manage your online footprint yourself, that this was a field and there were real people in it doing real work. So a long time later, basically after having gotten to sort of the digital privacy space, I had been helping out to organize a lot of like what I guess I would call tech volunteering events. So the abortion access hackathons were something that I got to help put on after the 2016 election. And it was kind of an incredible story because we had like 700 people apply to like help organizations that already were working in abortion access to get through their tech wish list. So maybe like turning a spreadsheet into a database or like fixing a broken integration on their Salesforce. A lot of the stuff actually that T4RJ does today, which I'm so psyched that has continued all the way through. But it was great because at this event, it basically showed the value of like providing this direct hands-on support to people. I had a totally different job. I was just doing this as a volunteer. And then I was approached and asked if I wanted to run the Digital Defense Fund, which I was like, oh, no, I don't know how to do that. And they're like, I think you'll figure it out. And then this is now 8 years later. I guess we've all figured it out. Thanks to folks like yourselves who trusted me enough to join this team. So thank you. That was a very long answer, but thank you. Hopefully some of that will be exciting. Yeah.
No, it's really cool to hear how you just made it happen. You saw the need and moved in to fix it when corporations couldn't, right? Yeah. It's just like such a cornerstone of all the important work that's happening all the time. So that's great to hear that story.
Yeah, it's I think a lot about like starting, like if you want to get more into especially technology and privacy or digital security, there's always stuff that happens to us. Like we forget that it's our story too. You are a person who exists online. You've dealt with various problems with privacy your friends have. And I think just like knowing that you are allowed to go out there and like create a resource or invite other people to come solve a problem. Doesn't have to be a big event, can't even just be like, helping out your friends and people around you. So it's why I'm super excited about this podcast too, just because I think these days helping people sort of imagine what that can look like and those pathways is really fun.
Yeah, we've had so many people who also don't have traditional backgrounds on the podcast. Really like to talk to people to see what inspired them in their life to get into it. So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to go slightly away from the script. Just if you want to talk more about your work in Digital Defense Fund.
Yeah. So I am actually the executive director at Digital Defense Fund. So 8 years ago, after these tech events, I was asked if I wanted to start this organization, basically. And my role has evolved since then from we were first getting out there and sort of figuring out what are the problems that organizations, mostly at that point in abortion access, are seeing, what resources are going to be available to help them resolve some of the questions they have about their privacy and safety and how they work. And then today, my role largely is to help the team ensure that we stay funded, that everybody has resources, including non-monetary, to get back out to the community. I mean, like, it's been amazing to learn from the people we serve what the demand is. So Digital Defense Fund, as I'm sure is discussed elsewhere on this podcast, does everything from free digital security evaluations. We run a webinar series that's open to the movement space, and thousands of people a year move through our educational programs. We are really excited also that we get to do this kind of like one-on-one accompaniment where we get to actually coach folks through what they think their improvements need to be. And then we also get to sometimes help them pay for it provide these rapid response grants. So a lot of my job at Digital Defense Fund today is making sure that the team that has the resources everybody needs to do their work, finding new opportunities for us to collaborate with other organizations that do direct digital security support. That's been a really cool development that all of us are kind of working together these days since the time 8 years ago where it felt like it was just mostly me and one other teammate who it's very funny now that our team has grown so much. But it's been very cool because like when you're sort of the executive director at a very small organization, you also get to keep your hands on with like the things that are very important to the people you serve. So I still like to, when I can, provide direct services support to some folks who need like rapid response help. It's all hands on deck when there's, like a breach or another issue that needs to be resolved. And especially I love getting to like get out there and brag about everything everybody does and make sure that y'all get the credit you deserve and the opportunities to share it with an audience. So yeah, many thanks for providing one more space here on the T4RJ podcast.
Oh yeah, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad that DDF exists as an organization. I think y'all are really bringing up really important conversations. Kind of goes into the next part of this about threat modeling, because I think the first time I heard about threat modeling was because I attended a DDF training
Yeah.
that I think it was in collaboration with, honestly, I'll do a lot of collaborations with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to that. I think they were sex worker led. I cannot remember their name right now.
Oh, yeah.
So threat modeling is such a key part of digital security work, actually anticipating what the real risks people face are. So what are your experiences doing threat modeling or guiding people through a threat model?
Yeah, I love getting to start here because it's also, again, when we work with organizations, when people come to the Digital Defense Fund, they are often worried about everything. You hear horrible stories on the news, or you hear a tale of woe from a peer who dealt with, some kind of like hack or breach or piece of harassment online. And it just seems like, the internet and all digital space is just this minefield where you could step on absolutely anything and get, yourself into a real pickle. And so a lot of what we end up doing first together is something that I actually had to learn myself to do over time, which is like figure out of everything I could possibly be worried about, what are the most likely or like the most solvable sometimes issues that are going to come at me. So one of the things that became apparent after doing a lot of work in especially the abortion access space is that there are specific threats that are ideologically motivated in fields like abortion, where there's an established pattern of, for example, targeting of people who do abortions or people who support those abortions. Those targets can be individual people who decide they want to harass those folks. They can also be legislative, coming after folks with targeted policies that are meant to criminalize certain work. And then there was a big one that I think not all of us, even before I got into this job, I didn't realize kind of the space it really took up, which is financially motivated crimes. So scams are still, by and large, the most likely thing any nonprofit, any organization trying to especially move money around to support people is going to face. So, all the phishing attacks, almost every single group we've ever worked with has received some kind of scam in their email about buying gift cards or carding scams, they call them, or floods of fake donations coming in on their website. So just every time there's chaos in the world, I think it's easy to forget that it provides an open opportunity for the same kind of scams that we might even deal with in our personal life. So threat modeling is really, really helpful because it helps us to sort of ask questions like, what are the most likely threats I'm going to face, and who can help me figure out how? And then what can I actually do about it? I also like to think about sort of of these threats, what would have the most impact? And I know it's a very soft idea, like what does impact mean in this case? But I've often even like to think about it as how much time would it take me to recover from this event? Like how much of my day, hours of my life would I spend cleaning up whatever happened there? And you can see then how it kind of tracks up a pathway where you have this thing that might happen that is very disturbing or upsetting to you, but perhaps isn't going to disrupt as much of the work of the organization you're at. Still super important to focus on because we don't work well when we don't feel safe. And then it can go all the way up this pathway to targeted, persistent threat actor who is causing either physical threats or trying to really take your organization out in a certain way. And I think it's up to us to kind of draw it all out together. Some of my favorite work that we get to do at Digital Defense Fund is really sit down with people and map it out. It's really interesting to also do that mapping, literally, we'll sometimes put Post-its on a wall or in a Miro board or something with collaborative groups or collectives. So you have lots of different groups that are working up perhaps on the same task, like helping people get their abortions. But some groups might have a different idea or a different experience of what the threats are that they face that are most likely. So, I think that's been really great then to get people sort of literally on the same page where they can see what everybody else is dealing with and thinking about and come up with these okay, well, here's this stuff in the range of what we can solve together today, or, what a little money could support to solve. But it's great because then I think people come away from those conversations feeling, even though they just went through all the things that could go wrong, surprisingly relieved. It's, we have the kind of peace of mind that comes from knowing we at least know most of the landscape and we have a plan for what we think we're going to do next. So yeah, it's a really great exercise.
Yeah, I love that a lot of the trainings are started like that because it's kind of before we even get into what is going to keep you safe, we kind of have to get to the basics.
Yes.
I think it's a really cool way to get people to get into that headspace. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. And I think like the organization that you mentioned, was it Hacking Hustling that we had worked with? Yeah, they're fabulous.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
They're fabulous. I think that's also what I love is like we get to bring in other practitioners. So Hacking Hustling was a collaborative project of sex workers providing digital security information and support and tactics to each other. And, those are folks who deal with very specific threat issues. They deal with different legislation targeting their presence online and their ability to hold money or to actually stay safe in their work. And I think that that's why it's really also great when we get to bring multiple movements together, because then often you'll realize, oh, I didn't realize that this other group was actually dealing with a lot of the same threats of censorship online or threats of their assets being withheld. And some of like the wisdom that people work out together as communities ends up being applicable to another space like abortion access. So super, super cool. We love continuing to collaborate with those folks.
Yeah. Cross movement collaboration.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, important tenet of reproductive justice,
Yeah.
right, is working together across issues and identities, which is, yeah, so important.
Heck yeah.
I'm really curious to talk to you also about, within the threat model and when people are really facing the many risks that they face and the ways that they can protect themselves. I feel often when I've done digital security trainings that it brings a lot of overwhelm of like, oh gosh, all this stuff that I have to do and when am I going to find the time and like all these other things that leaves us often in a sense of, paralysis. And I'm really curious how you get people to actually take the digital security recommendations that you offer and move from theory to action.
Yeah, and you're asking this question at a really important time because like the sort of goal, right, of the opposition is to keep us overwhelmed, to like have constant fires of the day so you can never like focus and regroup and form an effective opposition. And so I think some of where I'm at right now, especially after this many years of working with organizations across the board, is kind of like at my own existential crisis about things like digital security guides. Like I think we can sometimes make the mistake as practitioners, or anybody can be a practitioner. If you're helping your mom set up a password manager, congratulations, you are a digital security practitioner. That's a great example. That overwhelm can be as big as working in your organization, as small as within your household. And I think a lot of times we just like slam this wall of text at people. Like one of the problems of, I think, doing any kind of like collaborative or collective work is that like we all want to be really good straight A students. We want to do right by each other. We want to do right by ourselves. We want to get the right answer, quote unquote. And so we think about it as being like comprehensive. I want to close all my doors and ensure every little leak is sealed. And that's just such a high bar to hold yourself to say nothing of like then trying to provide service to other organizations and helping them figure out what they want to tackle first. So I'm actually at the point where after this long, we're really trying to reduce the amount of walls of text that we're, shoving at people, thinking about like if we're going to have this conversation, like talking about people's emotional state first, because like you're very often very elevated. It's so hard to do even simple things for yourself if you're feeling really ramped up. And again, that threat modeling process is something really re-regulating for a lot of folks. Sometimes it's not always great for the first call. Sometimes people just need to tell you how their day is going and what they're feeling and what they're worried about. But even that process of like resynthesizing your experience for another person is like very regulating, and it helps you to kind of like narrow down what it is actually you want resolved today. It's why I think some of what DDF over time, we've realized that we get a lot more of that sense of people actually getting to finish what they set out to do through the like lens of doing it together. So like time spent together turns theory into practice is like a phrase that we'll say a lot. And it's emerged over time because you find that even putting folks into a social setting, like maybe it's some office hours or we're doing a study hall online together. I found this in person as well, that it's so much easier to then just to say like, this list looks really big. I'm feeling really frustrated. And somebody's like, oh yeah, all I did was like do this, but it was really helpful. You get that sort of peer feedback that helps you to like feel encouraged. I often now have tried even pedagogically to like rearrange how I'm trying to work with folks, where I will try to put the stuff that's like set it and forget it first, especially in like a training or if we're doing a workshop, because Also, like I say this too, as somebody whose attention span is like not fabulous, that if you then drop off, like you can't focus anymore after like 15 to 20 minutes, we've at least talked about why, for example, like Signal is a great alternative to SMS text messages. And so you've taken one thing back with you for the day that is probably going to be pretty high impact. So I love to try and like put the set it and forget it stuff ahead and then get into the whole like at the end we'll talk about the stuff that maybe requires like practice over time where I'm having to like learn how to like compartmentalize my work into different accounts or something that's really going to require me to like develop a habit. But this is like a crisis moment because I think again like more people are joining movements every day, which is great. But then like we sort of hand you this onboarding list that's like really really long, and I think people are, you know, eager to try and cover all their bases when maybe especially like there are only a few that are really going to be critical first, especially like where we're talking with each other and what about. And those are also like provide that positive feedback that like, oh my gosh, I did it. And then now it's much easier to move on to something a little more complicated. So I really love all the work that T4RJ does in trying to constantly test out these systems. I'm positive we could probably go on for an eternity of like all the advice we get about where and how exactly we should be talking to each other. But like then what's usable and what's accessible and what makes especially people feel like they're capable of, you know, doing this and more, I think are always exciting questions on my mind.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah.
I wrote down time spent together turns theory into practice.
Yes,
I feel
yes,
like that's applicable across so many different types of work.
yes.
And I think I've really been noodling over the how we are together in a group being just as important as the what we do together, and like getting people in that emotional state to actually feel powerful is super important, for tech or for any type of movement work. And I always am appreciative of the tirade against long to-do lists.
And it's kind of funny because like I actually it was a peer who came to the first like abortion access hackathon in San Francisco. Sorry, it was actually the second one, but he brought with him, it was the Colin who works on Daria, which is the case management platform, was open source, and he managed to bring with him just like this amazing long to-do list. We got months of work done over just the weekend, and I was like, how do you do it, Colin? How do you get people to just like knuckle down and they like really zip through these things and they work together and they listen to each other? And he goes, you know what, Kate, I'm going to tell you something. He's like, people come together for the first time because they like what you have to say. They like the mission and the experience of getting to come together about a topic they care about. And he's like, every other time they get together after that, it's because they like each other and they're having a good time and they like being together. And I think it took me this many years to like really internalize what he was saying. And it's wild because it is so true that, you know, people stick together because it is this like social space of like the joy of figuring things out together, the joy of being together when it sucks. And all you really need is to like hang out with people and commiserate, or the like experience of getting to build something with the people that you're getting to know. All these are like how we keep moving through all the overwhelm, as you say.
Kind of building off of that, how can we build more sustainable networks to support the movement work we're doing and without necessarily relying on big funder organizations?
Yes.
I know this is kind of ironic because
yeah.
fiscally sponsored, but I felt like you would still be down to talk about this.
Well, and I'm especially down to talk about it because of that. Like, I mean, it's the great paradox, right? Where, you know, institutional funding is this tool that, for example, gave Digital Defense Fund. It was a big risk that institutional funding took to say, like, here's some cash, you go figure out what the problem is and how to address it. And yet, like, that's not, you know, like the revolution will not be funded. It is something we're still running into as we're trying to like raise money and expand beyond what I know that this space can do. So like so much of what I believe is that literally anybody can do this, like support each other to exist safely in digital space and to enjoy themselves doing it. Like I think anyone can do that. And in order for that kind of idea to like scale outward to where I know it can't just be reliant on those funding sources, because like our idea of why we show up and what our ability to shoulder risk is so much different from like big donors that are, for example, terrified right now of things like executive orders that are trying to say, I'm going to target you if you fund XYZ work, or I'm going to target your employees if they're doing blah, blah, blah. And it's, so easy for some of those like large institutional grantors to then like kind of shrivel up and get anxious about certainly very real risks. I'm not saying that those don't exist, but together as a community, every time I've ever gone out and done something that like was not connected even to Digital Defense Fund, just the amount of people who even within your space like want to contribute to its sustainability. Like there's so many people waiting around for somebody to ask them for help or just like give them a space where they can be supportive. So I'll give you a hard example. I have a standing offer that anybody in my community that wants to do protest support work, we'll do a free workshop. I like anytime, call me, like signal me with your questions, like we'll do some hands-on support, like doesn't have to be part of any kind of like DDF pipeline. And so I go out and give these trainings or workshops where we'll like work with people to like all set up their signal together before protests and stuff. The number of times people have tried to pay me is like overwhelming. Like people really, really want to like help out and contribute to like a pool of resource within their own community. And I think just like, again, that like, how do I find social space for people to get together? I don't think it requires institutional funding. I also don't even think it requires like official 501c3 organizations. Like the number of collectives that pop up that manage to support each other. And the more people you get in, the more you get to like spread out also that like the need, the resource, and the risk between a group that like is all different. Like some of the folks in my local community where we organize around everything from abortion to like rural surveillance, resistance, and privacy. Some folks are retired and they have a ton of time. Some folks make a lot of money at their job and want to pay for whatever tech tools we need. And I think like it's all easier said than done to just say like, I think that there's already enough out there. And I do think, especially in this job, that people should be paid for their work. That we're going to have to find a more decentralized way of not only, I think, like offering to each other, but also being concrete about our needs. So like, I love getting to encourage people who give community trainings to say, like, be transparent with people about the fact that this costs you time and that it would be fair to pay you. Like, some of what I hope we get to do also at Digital Defense Fund is like when we bring in other trainers or other people who do work in their community and pay them, you're sort of also setting this floor that says like, you deserve to be paid and it's at least this much. And like, I hope you can then feel you have something to take with you back to like your other sources and say like, this is what my time is worth. And I know it's kind of like an imperfect puzzle that we're all going to be figuring out as we go. Like we even just in my own community had this big discussion about not making our abortion org a C3 and just deciding to continue operating as a collective. So it's cool to see how even in different parts of my life, you can see how detachment from these dependencies like could work. They're going to require patience, but I always love seeing all the new experiments that people come up with. So I'd be curious what y'all think too. I mean, honestly, like especially now with T4RJ and seeing how much people like want to give in, but then also need support to continue to remain involved. Like, how do we strike that balance?
I've recently been doing, and I've told Lou about this, a lot of mutual aid work in my local community, mostly like connecting with other people in other orgs who aren't C3s or C4s. I mean, of course, there are always going to be the orgs. I feel like, I guess they're needed in some ways, like they have their space or whatever. But recently, I don't know if you know who Will is. He's another T4RJ person, but we happen to live in the same community. We found out after we both joined T4RJ, but we were organizing this mutual aid fair, and it was just really cool to see all the actual like local groups that aren't C3s or C4s doing things like community fridge group, people funding their own projects that they care about. Then the abortion collective I'm in, trying to figure out different ways to get resources and funding outside of that. And then even the groups that are C3s and C4s sometimes trying to figure out loopholes and things because they know they can get the funding. So how do we provide it to groups that don't necessarily want to be so?
Exactly. And I think like it's again, once you figure out that if you start collaborating across enough like movements and spaces, there's some groups that can like hold a certain amount of risk or resource that they then have the ability to share. Like rarely are any of us always using like it's a very like nuts and bolts example, but I have a giant stack of folding chairs. The number of times those have come out and been loaned out to people for events at different organizations, different causes across the community. And you think about like, what's the software equivalent of that I can lend out? What's the resource in terms of people and their expertise? Like I was so psyched that I found out that, the kind of thing that DDF does, the sort of like technical assistance, which I guess it's like an imperfect term. If anybody has a better one, please let me know. But the idea that you get to provide support directly to organizations and groups to improve their like collective tools, capacity, skills, and that's like super common across cooperatively run like bakeries. So like bakeries that operate as cooperative, like part of the benefit of a cooperative is that you get to like offer technical assistance to other folks trying to do the same thing. And that's like, I was like, oh, how inspiring. I like learning from, these other like models of like labor rights and like collective work, that some of what we're looking to do has been done so many times before, and we can look to the wisdom there of like how we work it out. So very cool.
I love thinking of what's the bakery equivalent to our technical problems. I feel like T4RJ can hopefully offer infrastructure. I feel like that's such a big one, like you're talking about, right? Especially from a technical standpoint. So many people in small groups, especially with maybe more higher risk threat models, wanting to move off of Google right now and searching for alternatives and needing a safe space to test that out. Like, what would it look like to self-host something? Like, how hard is it actually? Like, where can we do that? And I feel like I would hope that T4RJ's resources can be supportive for people who are looking to do that. And that type of resource sharing, I think, is such a key part of how organizations with some budget can support other folks.
Absolutely. I think, and you're hitting right on one of these core issues that I know I'm so glad that we're at least going through it together, which is like, can I self-host my infrastructure? Where should we be collaborating? Who has the skills to keep it running? These are all like big, sticky questions that I think don't work unless you have the ability to like answer them collectively and to catch each other when we trip up a little bit, because it's not y'all. I mean, if folks ever are listening to this and they're like, gosh, I wish my organization was on all of these different tools, I'm like, it's not your fault. They are not simple to set up, and these are not simple processes to implement. So like, be nice to yourself. You'll get there with help.
Yeah, we talked about that recently, like how we know that we need to get off these tools. And I was like, is there an actual step-by-step guide? Because we keep telling people to do it, but I'm like, what? But do we have like, I don't know, a breakdown of how to actually, first you do this, then you do this? Because I really feel like maybe it's like we're past the point of, I guess, just talking about it. It's like, oh, we know we need to do this. Now let's make that guide so people actually want to do it.
Yes. Oh, I love it. And then honestly, too, like guides, even just having somebody to talk to that did it, like in your network someplace, or like I could go ask my friend. It's indispensable, just the amount of like one-to-one encouragement that like, it's possible, you can do it, but it's also not trivial. So it's not your fault that you didn't do it by yourself. I love that.
I'm curious, if you really had to narrow it down, this is a tough one, but what's one thing that you really wish people understood about technology's role in movement work?
Ooh, honestly, so the biggest thing that I think of, this is a personal point of view, of course, but over the course of learning how to do this job, or all the different spaces that technology occupies, and all of the problems with like surveillance and everything else, you sort of meet a lot of people who are also in the digital security space who are like, I hate all of it. We should just like, you should just throw your phone in a river. It's all garbage. Delete Facebook, like do all this stuff. And it's just very interesting how many people you meet who have like this like intimate knowledge of the problems, and yet they're like very resigned. Like they have sort of a nihilist viewpoint. I'm sure it's very earned, and it feels sometimes very hard to think about changing these spaces that we're in. But I would say to understand that like you have the right to technology, you have the right to take up space on the internet, you have the right to not have everybody chase you out of these platforms with a pitchfork and a torch. It's like, Facebook's one of my favorite examples of this, because so many of my peers are like, I've been off Facebook for years. And I'm like, that's great. That's totally fine. But I live in a rural community, and we actually don't have a newspaper. We don't have a radio station. I get everything from like, all critical news comes through Facebook. And for other people, if they deleted it, they would just simply be absent information, including like evacuations and like very critical stuff that happens in our climate, disaster world. And so understanding that like you have the right to take up space in these platforms online, that you have the right to access like safe to use technology that's accessible, that is usable. And then like honestly, just how much it's already done for us. Like it's this water we swim in, right? So we're like not always conscious of how much we do online, but like these spaces, they're like where our peers are and where movement happens and all these kind of miraculous things. Like I'm so lucky we get to work around folks who are in abortion access. Like you see people every day connecting with support they would absolutely never have if there were not a way to reach out online and find it. One of the things that comes to mind is I love that, for example, even the subreddit that's the r/abortion subreddit is run by experts who ensure every single question gets a real answer. And that is a space that people made for themselves online. And I just like I love that it's this toolbox and this substrate that people get to like express themselves. Like it's why it resonates so much with me that like technology is a form of human expression, and why protecting its your freedom and your right to it is so important. So I am very enthusiastic. I think that also like how you fix technology is by understanding its importance in social movements, and we get to define what it should be. Like Signal's another great example where Signal was built for the use case of people doing sensitive human rights work abroad, and therefore it works better for everybody. And that's like kind of a miraculous thing to have this free tool run by a community supported by the planet that supports free speech and our right to connect to each other genuinely across the miles. And I think we're right at the beginning of what we're going to see there. So I would advise everybody, especially if you're worried about like where this world of computer is going, to like don't give up. I would say like stay present, stay like ask for the things you actually want. And I think, understand that the most meaningful thing that I think technology brings to us is each other. So yeah, I have a lot of big feelings. You could tell it's like been a lot of time to sit here and think about like, oh my gosh, everything that's so like catastrophic happening across so many online or digital spaces. What does it mean to me? Why am I fighting so hard for it? And that's why.
Yeah, I feel like it's so important to name that example of Facebook and your experience living rurally and
Yeah.
Reddit and all of these ways that otherwise we would be more isolated from each other. Otherwise, we would be more in danger. And
Yeah.
while technology comes with so many surveillance risks, as well as like just advertising slop, I feel like that's just increasing on so many of these platforms. But holding on to those things that are important about it is really important to do. So thanks for naming that.
Yeah, I really think the Facebook one is a really interesting example and important. I've never thought about it like that. People in my generation, so I'm Gen Z, but like older Gen Z, and I feel like we're always like, why are people using Facebook? Like, for example, roller derby, like all of my roller derby team likes to use Facebook for all the updates, and a good amount of them are millennials, older, and like middle age, I guess. And we're like, oh, just get with the times, use Discord. But that's just such a good call out because sometimes that's just kind of what works because it's already been a pillar in our communities for so long, and that's what more people have access to.
Yeah, and I think I like that you mentioned Discord because I think it touches on a little bit of what's invisible sometimes about why people remain on Facebook. Is that like what works about Discord is that people get to make their own space and then decide how they want to manage it. And like when communities work really well, it's because they are self-moderated and they come up with their own rules. And the only reason that actually Facebook is still so active is the groups. And so you have these like community-based groups that operate, in my opinion, many of them are much more healthy in how they actually work than the rest of Facebook writ large or even the rest of the internet. And so you see these like very well managed local groups that, like I think about, again, the emergency management context. We have a group where like they really keep track of what's allowed to be posted, especially when there's like a wildfire or something else going on. And as a result, you get a lot of this like really productive community engagement and connection. We were actually able to do a lot of, for example, in my community, organizing against flock license plate reader surveillance cameras on Facebook, which some people are might find a little ironic, but I think it worked for us. And it's why I'm always grateful to meet people where they're at and have, my assumptions always questioned about like when I'm thinking like, oh, people shouldn't use this. It's like, well, what needs are you meeting with it? And like, is there a way to use it more safely? And, just that process of forcing myself to listen has, I think, made me a better practitioner over time. So, yeah, fun to live it.
I honestly regret deleting my Facebook a little bit because I missed the free and for sale group was so great and such an amazing space for like mutual aid support. And I tried making a new Facebook account and they wanted me to scan my face from 3 different angles, and I was too creeped out. I didn't want them to use my face for their avatar research, so I'm still off, but I kind of regret it, and I'm creeped out by the new stuff that they're adding.
God, wow, that's a shocker! Holy crap! Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That's wild. Oh,
I was somehow able to get out of that because I remember I had to keep attempting to make a Facebook for roller derby, and I was like, I'm not giving you my face, and I was like, I guess I won't have Facebook, but I think I signed up with my number at one point, and then they didn't make me. It was weird, so maybe try that. But I was able, and I don't have a profile picture up there, so maybe that could work. So winding down a little bit, do you have a piece of media that changed how you see the world or society or your community in any way?
yeah. So, gosh, I'm waffling between two, and I'm just gonna go for it and pick one because I think it's like a worthwhile rewatch if you haven't. But there is a Alfonso Cuarón's movie Children of Men is among my favorites. It is actually the movie I go watch when I'm like having an awful time as an activist where I just like feel very bleak about everything. And I go and I rewatch it and I have a very big cry. It's my like cry your eyes out really good movie. But I didn't realize like why this movie had such an impact on me. And it's actually kind of remarkable because without giving too much away, I know it's been out for decades, so spoiler alerts and all that, but every single major character in the movie is a former or current activist. And all of the conflict happens between activists who are all just disagree about how best to save the world. And at the beginning of the movie, nobody knows it yet, but everything's about to start getting a lot better. And so I think about this like amazing movie, which is about basically it's a reproductive justice movie. It is a movie. It's a dystopian movie about how the world stopped having kids for like 20 plus years, and everything fell apart because humanity has no future. That's all about to start getting better, but nobody knows it yet. And so like people are still hanging on to this like disaster world where nobody can trust anybody, where everybody has their own agenda, where like, immigrants and refugees are degraded. And it's just incredible to watch sort of like what would happen if it was all about to start getting better and we were all so trapped in our own hurt and like what had happened before that we couldn't really like focus on moving forward and letting the next generation live. I'm getting choked up kind of talking about it. It's a really beautiful movie. But I think what's also really kind of cool about that movie is in it, 2 of the characters actually have this like safe house that they've made where the other characters kind of roll through it at some point. And I was so inspired even by just the like look of this thing and the fact that they had it that like my husband and I decided to make a like community retreat space in Science Institute. And it just had such a huge impression on me and how I saw the world. And I think a lot sometimes too about what would it look like to be the like cool old person when, the next generation, like everything's going to get better. And like, you remember the old world, like what role then do generations play together? So yeah, it's a fabulous movie. I highly recommend watching it. Bring a box of tissues, seal yourself. It's definitely a very like wild ride, but definitely all time top 10 for me for that reason. So hopefully that answers your question and piques some interest. I always love when people get to revisit it. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to watch that. I love, and I know Lou does as well, because we have so many questions about media that people are watching. Just in general, I feel like it can inform your work, but also just who you are, your personality. So I'm gonna watch it.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. And I think for any of your audience that are also a little less into the fiction and more into nonfiction, one of the things that's like really piqued how I'm thinking about the future and the topics I think I'm going to be interested for many more decades of my life is there's a documentary called All Light Everywhere that came out that's about like the history of the camera and as a device and how it factors into a sort of landscape of surveillance today. It's also visually spectacular. It's beautifully shot. You get to go in and see where like Axon body cameras are made and how they work. And I think it really got me thinking, I mean, especially as like this other movie, Children of Men, it is a dystopian science fiction movie. You see a lot of the same technology and unfortunately realities deployed today that I think that is how I think I'm going to be very focused into the future, is trying to understand like the role we've assigned, especially cameras, to play in seeing the world for us, surveillance, but also like, you know, this AI driven world where we want computer vision to like occupy so many products that we use, that I think it's like, very important to think about the cultural idea of like what cameras do and when they tell truth versus like, you know, what does it mean to see with the naked eye versus to like have evidence, quote unquote, and how much that's played the role we expect like digital space to also somehow be more real than often even our own account of the world. So super, super interesting. Thank you I apologies that I had to pick two, but is a war in my head.
One fiction and one nonfiction seems appropriate. So I love Children of Men.
Great options.
Yes. We should have a movie night with like, or like even like just a rec list of like things that people at T4RJ have watched, because I would love to hear from yourselves at some point too, like what media has I think changed y'all.
I'd love to talk about that. Octavia Butler is always going to be on my list of authors, but thank you for those recommendations. I'm going to check that out, especially All Light Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I always just want to hear about the development of like camera and specifically with how people of darker skin are shot and how that works. But yeah, thank you for those recs and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is a fabulous conversation. I love the podcast and I'm so excited to get to continue to support, especially as just like T4RJ's biggest fan. I can't wait to come back at some point, I'm sure in a bit, and we'll all have much to talk about over these next years together.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kate.
All right. Thank you very much, y'all.
This episode was brought to you by Techies for Reproductive Justice, a project of the Digital Defense Fund. Your hosts for today's episode were Lou and Azamare. Thanks to our technically tenacious editor. And thank you to Kate for sharing her unconventional technologist story with us today and for reminding us that time spent together turns theory into practice. If you liked what you heard, stay in touch with us by subscribing. Want to become a member of T4RJ or have ideas for future episodes? Check out our website, techies4rj.org, to learn more and send us a message. Again, that's techies4rj.org. Our theme music is Beauty Flow by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. The song is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. And thank you to all of our listeners. We are really grateful to be in this movement together. See you on the internet.